What is good, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Redwater Podcast. As always, I'm Yasar.
And I'm Kimo.
So far, we're already two practices into the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend, actually, but we're going to start off this episode kind of going over the Silverstone Grand Prix because we still haven't talked about that just yet. And then we'll probably give you guys a little kind of predictions, our thoughts on the race this upcoming weekend. But starting off with Silverstone, which I'm be honest, full bias, has been the best race of the ground effect era. Like it has been. It has. Cause outside of Hamilton winning, by the way, Lewis Hamilton won a race in like 2 years. If you're not just in case, you didn't know. Just in case you didn't know. But Lewis Hamilton won for the first time in like 2 years. But honestly, outside of just Lewis winning, just the nature of the way the race played out, like we got mixed conditions. What was it? Because wasn't it dry, then wet, then dry again? Like that. Every time you have a race like that, it's going to be absolutely spectacular. And Silverstone delivered like it's been delivering for the past couple of years. Like I feel like we haven't had a bad Silverstone race in a really long time. But yeah, so I guess just we can start it off. Kimo, I know you wanted to start by diving into exactly, what led to Lewis being able to win the race at the end of the day.
Yeah, so it was such a chaotic race in terms of weather, in terms of strategy, that it could have, at any point in the race, right, you could have called it for one of five drivers, right? You could totally make the case that Piastri deserved the win. Obviously, Lando in there too. I think there's
Mm,
actually a strong case for Max, especially at the end with the pace that he had. And Russell was doing a fantastic job before his car broke down. It's one of those races that shows how good Lewis is under pressure and in mixed conditions, that the experience shines, right? That,
mm,
these past few races, it's been clear, as we talked about, the McLaren is the best car with Red Bull in Max's hands, still very, very good.
mm,
And Mercedes, like slowly but surely making their way up there, right?
mm.
But dealing with some race trim um,
Could you
negatives,
not
right?
say that they're up there at this point though? Because I do agree with you with what you just said of yes, even though went into like that whole thing last episode, but yes, everyone's really close, but McLaren is kind of like at the top of the food chain right now. But I remember last episode, specifically me also, I was saying like, oh, I didn't think Mercedes would have enough to be able to like get the win at the end. I thought like they were just going to get a podium, but after seeing the way they performed in the race, but also especially quali, they were 1-2 after quali, which I did not expect. Which I don't think anyone expected that, not even them. But so for me, I feel like after seeing that, now I'm starting to think like I would take back the words from what I said last episode, where I was like, I don't think they're in the mix. I don't think they're really up there with Red Bull and McLaren. I feel like after this race, they might have kind of proved that they are. And because I wouldn't necessarily, we'll have to see how the other races play out, but I don't think they're necessarily going to not be able to keep up with the following races. Do you get what I mean? So I feel like it
100%.
it could be a fair point to say that from this race on, they are in the fight for the win pretty much every time.
I think what you said last time about how Mercedes isn't quite there, I still think is true. And the reason
Mm,
why I say that is because I think in let's say the past three races, two out of three,
mm,
Mercedes has been really good. Think about
mm,
Canada, right? Or actually, that's not the past two or three races, but races that are like fresh in my mind about Mercedes doing a great job.
mm,
Canada was the first time they really showed up
mm,
the whole season, right?
mm,
And that was in conditions that were very similar to Silverstone, right? You're
mm,
talking like cool weather, right? With
mm,
rain mixed in with dry, mixed in with rain over and over with pit stops and all this stuff, right? And
mm,
that's what I meant about like the experience coming into play. Guys
mm,
like Lewis, right, know how to take advantage of those opportunities and make the most of them. Whereas
mm,
guys like Lando, right, can trip over themselves under that pressure.
mm,
So my point is that of the races so far where Mercedes has clearly been on the same level, because let's be honest, at Austria they weren't,
mm.
right? In
No,
quali
I
they
agree.
were,
I
but in the
agree.
race they were not.
Mm,
Russell didn't deserve to win that compared to Lando and Max, right?
absolutely.
Um, and that's what I mean is that of the races that have been in normal condition, which we
Mm,
can argue is going to be most of the races for the rest of the season, Mercedes isn't quite there yet. And I think it has a lot to do with this thing that this is talking on my ass. Okay, this is not backed up by data, but this is, I think, pretty logical considering the trends that we have seen in terms of development in the ground
mm,
effect era. And what I mean by that is that McLaren, when they started getting good, one of the main things they struggled with was that they could get the tires up to temperature, but they couldn't keep them cool. and they started to chew through them a little fast. And that's what I'm talking about. Like last year, 2023, midway through the season, where at Austria in Great Britain, they finally had the pace, but it was still lacking in that department, in like the full race trim department, compared to
Mm-hmm.
Red Bull, right? A team that had established themselves already in terms of long-term pace. And I think Mercedes is at that point right now. They found pace, which is the hardest part,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now they have to find a way to dial it back, but not too much, to
Mm-hmm.
allow some of these more nuanced racing attributes, right, to come out of the car. And I think it's why they were so strong in quali for most of these races in the past, and because
Mm-hmm.
also Russell and Hamilton are both fantastic qualifiers, right? So there's no
Mm-hmm.
issue in terms of driver talent. Um, and that's why then I think, especially as we approach Hungary now, I don't think, like, spoiler alert, I don't think either the Mercedes are winning the race. I think they will qualify very well, but I don't think they'll win the race.
Mm. That's a very fair point, because I do think one thing I didn't consider as much was the conditions of like the tracks where they were doing well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I still think, well, because Silverstone, even in quali, even though it was a dry quali, you are right that just in general, also the weather in Silverstone is a bit drier. And I know I heard the commentators mention during the race that the car itself, not even necessarily the drivers, but the car does prefer those cooler conditions and seems to perform better under them. So I guess with that, yeah, it will be curious to see like how well they continue to do with the other races. I still think during Silverstone, at least, especially the first dry stint, they were showing very, very strong race pace. Because from what I remember, after the first couple laps, it was Hamilton and Russell 1-2, and there was a point where they were kind of pulling away from, I think it was Norris, that was in P3, or it might have been Max.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, all of that, went out the window once stuff started to get wet. But I don't know. That's just why I don't know, because I haven't looked like I haven't looked a lot at kind of, necessarily where Mercedes development is going, from this point on, and then also just kind of the actual like deep down nitty gritty telemetry data, all that stuff from the Silverstone race. The only kind of slight thing I know from, I think it was from Julian Palmer's analysis, was he had mentioned that Mercedes, at least at Silverstone, seemed to have a bit more of advantage on the straights, but McLaren had a bit more advantage in the corners. And I think that probably makes sense also with how once the track got wet, clearly the McLarens, especially during those like mixed conditions, the
Yeah.
trick conditions before you go full
Yeah.
inters, oh yeah, the McLarens were flying, absolutely flying.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I do fully agree with you about Lewis's experience also, because that really is what gave him the win at this track. I think we've talked about it in the
Yeah.
past, where I know you've mentioned with Lando before, I think about like Austria also, but you do really see when a driver goes to a track that they know or that they like, that like suits the way they drive, it very much shows, and it helps them produce really great results. And that absolutely is part of why Lewis was able to produce the result that he did that weekend.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. The mixed conditions, talking about McLaren really quick, getting back to that,
Mm,
was definitely because McLaren was running higher wing. And I
mm,
think that's what they mentioned in the speed traps on the straights, in the
mm,
dry and in the wet. You could clearly see that like McLaren was running a different style of setup.
mm,
And that's probably to their detriment. I mean, we were about to go into soon about McLaren's struggles, but yeah, I think they were gambling on more rain in the race than what actually
mm,
became. And I think the only reason why I'm bringing this up is to say that I think in the grand scheme of the whole season, I don't think it's necessarily a fair thing to say that McLaren and Mercedes is faster on the straights to one another,
mm.
because there's so many other factors when it comes to the setup and
Yeah, yeah,
in those conditions, right? But
yeah,
yes, I do
absolutely.
think at Silverstone specifically, Mercedes had the setup right. They
Mm,
totally got it right. And to be fair to Max and Red Bull, also did too. I think they just, for whatever reason, at the end there, right, the hard tires were just somehow the best tire coming out of mixed conditions, which was a very strange thing, because typically it's not the case, right?
mm.
Typically, when you have mixed conditions, cooler conditions, a harder compound is not as good as the softer ones, and you can typically keep the softer compounds in a better temperature window,
Yeah,
right,
and
and
maybe
allow them to
extend them
last
a bit more
longer.
because they're not going to get as hot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but I think the higher downforce setup of the McLarens did not allow them to do that.
Mm,
So maybe Mercedes was even running less downforce than even Red Bull,
mm,
and that allowed Lewis to do his thing,
mm,
right, and do the dance and keep those tires in a great, just enough, right,
Mm.
to get him to the end and get him to the win.
I think probably the strongest factor in that also probably wasn't even necessarily the actual compound, but that one was fresh and one was used. Because I know for sure Lewis went on used softs, and I would assume that Lando was putting on used softs also. So I think
He
that's
did.
why also, um regardless of which tires may have been better, just the degradation that they were going to face with the softs kind of made it so they weren't an option anyway. I thought it was really risky
Mhm.
for Lewis even to put on the softs too. I was hoping he was going to put on the hards.
I think for him, it was all or nothing, right? I
Mm,
think he knew that in those dry conditions, I don't think he quite was convinced, or Mercedes weren't convinced, right? Obviously, for Lewis, it's hard for him to know. But I don't think
mm,
Mercedes and Bono were convinced that they had the pace over Max,
mm,
so they had to gamble. And they probably figured the McLarens are going to be good too. I don't think they gambled, or I don't think they thought that the McLarens are going to be that bad in terms of tire deg on the
mm.
softs.
Yeah.
I don't even think McLaren thought that, right?
Yeah, no, definitely not.
Clearly. But yeah, just finishing up this whole thing about Lewis, just I still think ultimately this is probably his best performance of the past since 2021.
Oh, for sure.
Um,
Yeah.
it was a great drive.
No, it was.
And
That's why, like, because we literally talked last about. I remember last episode, I literally said, like, hey, we know Russell is kind of objectively, stats wise, the better Mercedes driver right now. But if you give
right
Lewis a car
now,
that he likes, shit, and a track that he likes, he's going to deliver. And that's why I was so happy
100%.
watching that race too. Of like, obviously not you, but people in general. There's always the people who are gonna say, I'm not
Haters.
gonna lie. Like before that race, literally earlier that week, I had a conversation with someone, and they were just trying to tell me, I'll be honest, man, I don't think Lewis really has it like that anymore. And I'm like,
Damn. Damn. Good
I
God.
just, yeah, yeah. That's
That's
just,
shocking.
that's all I have to say. And that's why I was so glad also that it wasn't even like not to diminish, Leclerc Monaco or anything, or Norris, like with his, well, it wasn't a safety car win. Like it was, what I mean to say is it was a win that was fully on merit. Like he absolutely did every single thing that he needed to do that weekend to make sure he won. He didn't slip up once.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I don't know. It was a good feeling. It was a good feeling. As a fan of
Yeah.
Mercedes and as a fan of Lewis, as a fan of someone who's, wants to see him continue to push like he always says he's going to do, it was great seeing that.
I agree. I agree. And people who are saying that, well, McLaren would have won if they hadn't screwed up. That's different than
Then
a
don't
safety
screw
car
up.
win, right? Yeah, exactly. It's it's
Mm,
it's it's actually it has when people see those mistakes and stuff, sometimes they think like, well, the person who won didn't really deserve it,
mm,
right? But like, I actually will retract my thoughts of what I said in Austria, or when I said that Russell didn't deserve to win. I'm going to retract that because my point is that when you see the other drivers make mistakes, right, you realize actually just like how close on the edge these guys get and how close on the edge these teams get to optimize everything. And
mm,
sometimes it goes over the line. And whether that means a crash with another driver or a screwed up strategy, the wrong tire, or not bringing your driver in on the
mm.
proper lap and just take
Oh
the double
yeah.
stack, even if it, God,
Oh,
yesterday was so
I
bad.
forgot to
He
mention that. I
deserves
forgot
so
to write
much
that
to
in my
win, man.
notes. But it's generally
So
just
bad.
what you said about everything about experience. I think what McLaren saw this weekend in terms of the team and the drivers is the
Yes.
experience that Lewis and Mercedes and Max and Red Bull have is what made the difference for them to be able to finish the one step above on the podium than McLaren did.
Yep.
Because, like you just said, McLaren making the mistake of not double stacking them when they did that pretty much just ruined Piastri's race.
Mhm.
They also pitted a lap later, like when it was going back to the dry stint. Norris pitted a lap later than Hamilton, or I'm pretty sure Max did. And then also just I guess for Norris, even though I remember I looked back, I saw a clip that actually had the radio messages between Norris and the team as he was doing his in lap before he was gonna switch to the dryers, and when they were kind of debating like, hey, do we put on softs to try to cover Hamilton? Do we put on hards to try to cover Max? And just kind of, well, one, the indecisiveness, because a more experienced team or a team that has been used to this type of situation will already say like, hey, no, this is the tire to go, like let's go with that. I'm sure there's definitely a bit of debate, even with Max's pit wall and Lewis's pit wall as well, but it seemed like there was a bit more of a clear decision from those sides of the garage, and ultimately both Lewis and Max got happy with the strategy they ended up with. But then Norris after the race was like, looking back, man, that probably wasn't the right way to go, that type of stuff. And that's the type of stuff where
Yeah.
like you only learn that like through that type of experience. I hope for Norris now though that like after all of these situations he's been in where yeah, because how many races is it in a row now where he looks back and he's like, I could have won that race, we could have won that race. It's
Yeah,
they need to learn all of these things and really get used to these situations before they can be as like clear cut and as clinical as those top teams.
100% agree. 100% agree. And that's a great transition into talking about McLaren and just
Mm,
in general, right? Yeah, you're totally right that these past few races, you could make the argument that many of them should have won. Should
mhm,
have won. Whether it's Lando's decisions or whether it's McLaren's decisions. And yes, I mean, there's always a bit of nuance in there of like, well, the conditions, like it's hard to know and blah, 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 blah. But
mm,
ultimately, the point I think both of us are trying to make here is that when you go through these, you the the thing to take out of them isn't necessarily the result,
mm,
right? It's the trust you continue to build and the experience you continue to build between driver and team.
mm,
And when you get to situations like we had at Silverstone for Lewis and Max, right? This is same old, same old. Hell, they've been in this.
mm.
Like Max already had a championship
Yeah.
battle,
No,
right?
like
No,
I
and
love that whole race. Max, like whenever they got on the radio, they're like, "Hey, how's the track?" He's like, "Nah, it's not wet enough yet. It's not wet enough yet." Just
yeah,
he just knows. He knows.
he knows. Not just that, but the fact that what you said about the pit stops, right? Like
Mm,
Max has 100% trust in the team, and he'll
mm,
complain about it afterwards. But in the moment, there is no hesitation from GP, his race engineer, or Max about like, nope, we're doing this.
mm,
We're going for it. And sometimes, or actually, most of the time, it pays off. And even if it doesn't pay off for that 10% of the time, they did it with confidence and they know they
mm.
learn and they stick with it. But you're right that like doing this
No,
50-50
yeah, because
hop
with
on some of these
McLaren, it seemed
decisions,
like
not gonna work.
they were too afraid to make the call themselves, so they were
Yes.
like, "Oh, let's pass it on to Norris. He's the one in this situation. He's our lead driver, or
Yes.
whatever." But then even Norris was like, it seemed like Norris was then waiting for them to like, give him more advice on, "Hey, what do you think like
Put
the
me on the
better
best
option is?"
tire. Put me on the best tire. Yeah, he was just like,
Yeah,
just give me the best
there's
one.
there's three different ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
Mm.
that was the big thing, right? Is the biggest what if of that race is that Norris had a fresh set of
Oh,
mediums.
that's I forgot about that. I remember because I was like, it was one thing if, you had to
Baffling.
use softs and a fresh hards. You had
Mhm.
fresh mediums and you didn't put them on. Nah. That
Yes.
was a
It
very,
should have
very
been a
poor
wrap.
strategy
Should have
call.
been
Yeah.
they should have taken that advantage of the fresh mediums
Mm,
and looked at Verstappen on hards, looked at Lewis on old softs, and
mm.
gone, this is ours.
Yeah. My thought process is just if you have the choice between used tires and fresh tires, always go for the fresh
Mhm.
tires. Like honestly,
Yeah,
unless there's genuinely only like 4 laps left, 5 laps left, it's usually always better to go with the fresh tires.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, obviously, like we're a little biased because we've done some racing before, and that's typically how it rolls in that
Mm.
too.
Well, no,
But
but like
yeah,
not
I
even
would.
from that. I feel like from all I've watched in the past of F1, whenever they're in situations like that, usually if a driver like, well, from what I've seen in the way teams make decisions, they usually prefer putting the driver on a fresh set of tires rather than putting them on a used set.
Typically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on the track. I think sometimes if it's at a really cold track or something, they sometimes like a tire that's a little
Mm.
broken in because then it
Mm.
doesn't matter too much. It won't
That's
wear
fair.
too
That's fair.
fast
Yeah.
afterwards. But it really, you're right though. It most of the time,
Mm.
95% of the time. I picked the 5% of the time as my anecdotal example, but
Mm.
95% of the time, you're right. It's
Yeah.
fresh tires can be better.
Mm.
Yeah.
I guess if we want to move on to poor strategy calls, like truly, truly disastrous team strategy calls, let's talk about Ferrari. I don't even
Boy,
remember
we're
where
talking about
Charles
them a lot,
Leclerc.
huh?
I don't even remember where Charles finished in the race. It wasn't in the points, was it? Or
Okay.
did he make it back in the
Okay.
points?
It was not in the
I
points.
just remember
Like
at one point he
no,
was
no.
like P16.
This
I
this
don't
dude finished
remember
a lap
hearing if he
down and he finished behind Kevin
he
Magnussen.
finished the left.
He finished a lap
I
down.
didn't know it was that bad. I'm not gonna lie.
No. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
What they even do? It was did they pit him for inters way too early? That's what happened, right?
Yeah,
Because it started
I
raining.
believe so.
It was that weird transition period, and they decided to call him in, even though literally no one else pit, except for
Yeah.
possibly Paris. Well, we're not even going to talk about Paris this episode, but Paris did
No, he was
Paris
2 laps
things.
down. Perez
Yeah,
was 2 laps
Paris
down.
did
So yeah,
Paris
we're not gonna talk
things.
about that.
Yeah. Um, I guess they at least didn't mess up signs of strategy as much from what I remember, but also just, I mean, the overall topic we're going to be talking about with Ferrari also is just they were lacking pace this weekend. They were lacking pace last weekend, and we had brought it up before last episode, and it really just comes down to the upgrades that they had brought, like just haven't been working properly. And so going into Silverstone though, they abandoned those. Yeah, they abandoned those upgrades. And Chemo, I think you were saying that instead they put on the not Imola,
Yeah, the Imola spec
the
upgrades.
Imola spec. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, it's not as old as the like Imola, right? Obviously, they made some small adjustments and stuff, so it's not quite like the car is back to the pace it was at Imola. It's
Mm,
just saying that they ditched the upgrades that they brought to Spain.
mm. Well, I mean, even if the car did go back to how was it Imola, how do you think that would compare with, the other team's cars right now?
It'd be slower.
Mm.
Let's say for example,
No, no, I know it'd be slower,
in
but
the
like how much slower?
probably a couple tenths. Let's
Mm,
leave for example, right? Let's say since Imola, you can make the argument that Mercedes's front wing upgrade was the big one, and that probably got them 2.5 to 3 tenths
mm,
because the drivers were able to get that nose in on corners, especially at tracks that suited that. You could say that Red Bulls and McLaren's upgrades probably got them 2 tenths, right?
mm,
Because you could say that like Mercedes made a bigger jump relative, right? But that
mm,
McLaren and Red Bull was still ahead. Um, that would be my like rough guess in terms of actual time. And if Ferrari ditched those upgrades, right now they're not only 2 tenths behind, or 2.5 tenths, right, compared to Mercedes, but they're whatever the gap was before that.
mm.
Um, and now and then also too is that the big thing, which we talked about last time, is more of the psychological thing in terms of the engineers. It's like you put all that effort for months into making those upgrades. You engineer them and you manufacture them and you send them out just to find out not only did they not work, but your understanding of how these upgrades are supposed to work did not come to fruition.
Yeah.
So now you're looking at the stuff you have been working on now and you're going, I don't know if this is going to work. So that's the biggest like um you know fallen domino. I don't know what
Mm.
metaphor you want to put in there, but it's the biggest downsides of this whole thing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know if you've heard anything about, I guess, what they plan to do or if they already have another upgrade package they're bringing. From what I've heard, at least for Hungary, they're not bringing another upgrade package. But I don't know.
I
Maybe
believe for
they won't have a
Hungary,
big. What are you gonna say?
yeah, I was gonna say, I believe for Hungary they bet somewhere in the middle. They use some
Mm,
aspects of the Spain upgrade because Hungary is not a super high speed track,
yeah.
and the problem with their upgrades was that on high speed corners, especially at Spain and Silverstone, they were getting porpoising midway through the high speed corners, which is not what
Mm,
you want, right, to
yeah.
maintain momentum. And then at a place like Hungary, I guess this doesn't matter as much. So they may have actually reverted to it or made some small tweaks to it.
Mm,
It's very possible. I couldn't find any confirmation on it, but I wouldn't be
okay.
surprised if they did something like that.
Did you have any other thoughts you want to add then about Ferrari?
Yeah, I mean, I actually want to talk about the fact that what's hilarious about this whole thing is that while Ferrari has been, treading water, right, barely able to stay afloat, right, while everybody else
Mm.
is swimming away, Haas has decided to get a motorboat and completely eclipse them. I don't know how this has happened now
Yeah.
in like half a season that Haas has decided, no, actually, we're good at development because that Haas is actually quite
No,
good
that
in the
Haas
hands
is
of Hulkenberg and
phenomenal.
Magnussen,
Yeah.
right? And it's the best Ferrari car, and like, yikes,
Yeah.
that's not a good look. Not a
Mm.
good look for Sauber either, not just Ferrari. Um,
Well, no, but I
and
remember last year when we were talking about how just bad of a look it was for Mercedes when Austin Martin was just disgustingly outperforming them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you can make the argument about McLaren too for a while too. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, but
Not
I
gonna lie,
think,
that's my bad. I forget that McLaren is powered by Mercedes. I don't know, because it's
yeah,
just because it's such like a big
yeah,
team. For some reason, my mind just automatically thinks like they're a works team. They make their own engine, but then I'm like, oh yeah,
yeah.
they gotta buy their engine.
We'll see if they are for the future. There's some speculation talking about whether or not they want to keep the Mercedes engine
Mm,
for 2026. But yeah, that's besides the point. Getting back to Haas, I think their design choices, they're starting to find a rhythm because they're not experiencing issues the way they were before. About now they figured out their tire situation, or they're not chewing
hmm.
through tires anymore. So now they can finally like step forward into the stuff that matters, like
Yeah.
pace. you know.
Mm.
And Hulkenberg and Magnussen are so experienced that they could probably give them the best data they could possibly imagine in free
Oh yeah,
practice.
absolutely.
And let's just talk about Hulkenberg really quick. All right.
Mm.
Like, Magnussen, you've been okay. You've been okay. Hulkenberg is having one of the best, I think his best season ever. And
Mm.
he's so old.
I don't think it's
I,
necessarily his best season ever.
I mean, I don't know his younger years as
I'm
much,
pretty sure
forgive
he's
me.
younger. He had a couple like pretty good seasons. I'm pretty sure.
I
Like
know he had a season
I
where
wouldn't
he,
think, because I thought part of like the whole thing about him is he's a very very good driver and he's gotten very close to podiums before, but he just still hasn't gotten
mhm,
a single podium.
he's never gotten a
That's what I
single
mean.
one.
I think there's other seasons he's had where he was getting like P5s, P4s.
I just think that given the situation at hand in terms of development, I remember back to his Renault days. The
Mm,
Renault was never like so far behind cars like the Red Bull that it was unrealistic for Hulkenberg to get the results that he was getting, right?
mm,
And with Carlos alongside him, it was clear that like both of them were pretty good.
mm,
Um, so I don't know. I guess it gets from my memory and everything. This just seems like just a really good set of performances this year from Hulkenberg
mm.
that
No, I do agree with you with
um
that. Absolutely.
and they've gone under the radar, to be honest. I think people who care and they look at a team like Haas, they're like, Hulkenberg's done a great job. But I could totally see why for other people it's just gone unnoticed. And I think he deserves more recognition. To be honest, he's having
Mm,
kind of an Albon or a Pierre Gasly 2021 season.
mm,
If you remember that.
mm. I mean, it's paid
Yeah.
off for him though. He has a contract for the
Yeah.
future. So
For Audi. Yeah,
yeah.
and I hope it pays off for him, and I hope he
Mm,
keeps going. That's probably, honestly, I was Hulkenberg's a great example of this weird trend that's happening now, where you look at Alonso, you look at Hulkenberg, and you look at Hamilton, and
mm,
it's created this weird situation that I don't think Formula One has been in probably a long time, where you know I don't know if it's like, advancements in medicine or if it's just that these guys are built different, but the older guys aren't quite so far behind the younger guys. Age
mm,
isn't really as big of a factor anymore.
yeah.
You could say that there are some things about Piastri and Lando and Charles that they're always going to be better than Lewis, but they make up for it. And
Mm,
I don't think in general you could say that age is the big factor.
mm,
And I hope it works out for Hulkenberg. I hope he stays in the
mm.
sport for a while and continues to put in these good performances.
In terms of the reasonings, I think it probably comes down to like both in terms of advancements in like medicine and also just the drivers themselves. Because at least when I think of athletes in other sports that end up kind of doing it much longer than they're supposed to, or like
LeBron.
age ranges in sports like increasing, from what it used to be, in the 80s,
Yeah,
90s. I know for sure a lot of that is just advances in medicine. We just know a lot more now about how to better take care of your body, and just athletes are also
right.
just a lot more serious about taking care of their body, like as it goes on. Did you say
Right,
LeBron?
right, right.
Yeah, yeah. LeBron is
Yeah, I said
prime
LeBron.
example of that. Perfect example of
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, dude's
Um,
playing with his own son now. It's crazy.
yeah.
It's nuts.
Other
But
big news with Haas is also that they've officially signed Ollie Behrman for 2025.
yep,
Congratulations, Ollie. We sang our praises for him after that
yeah,
Saudi Grand Prix when he put in that great performance. I haven't fully been paying attention to F2. I assume he's been doing pretty solid in F2. All
he's been
right.
okay. But
Okay,
I
yeah.
think a lot of the practice sessions he's been doing for F1 and obviously the race that he did really hurt his points in the standings and his pace. But now
Mm.
that he's signed with Haas, I don't think he
Oh
gives a
yeah,
shit.
yeah, yeah. No, he has a contract now. It doesn't matter.
So it doesn't matter. And I
Yeah.
think it's in terms of F2, in terms of looking at the drivers, the ones to actually look for are guys like Kimi Antonelli,
Mm.
and he's been doing good.
I
And I
know he
think
got
if
a race win
Behrman
at Silverstone too, didn't he?
in the
Yeah.
wet
Oh no,
in like the
Toto had
pouring
a
rain.
fantastic Silverstone weekend.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mercedes really did have a great weekend. But they're faced with a really weird scenario, right?
Mm,
Because Antonelli deserves a seat. Maybe you can make the argument, maybe not next year, but he definitely has the talent that like in the next 2 years you need to get him. But you and I still both agree that he shouldn't
it's
be
kind
in
of
that
rushed,
Mercedes seat.
yeah, if he comes in next year.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You're asking a lot of him because
Mm,
let's say Mercedes has one goal for next season, right? That is to continue the trajectory of their car development to allow themselves to compete for the constructors again,
mm,
right? I don't think they think they may say on camera that they think Russell is good enough to be world driver champion
Mhm.
currently, right, with the current development track and everything,
Mhm.
right?
I do think that they fundamentally believe that, or at least I think Toto believes
Really?
that. I think Toto believes
Yeah,
that.
I think if they say that in the media, they probably say it in the media. I don't know if they
No,
genuinely
for
think
sure
that
they'll
because
say in the media, but I'm saying I think
yeah,
even outside the
they
media, I
really believe
think
that.
Toto really does believe in George like that.
Yeah, okay. Look, Russell is a fantastic driver. I'm not saying he's not, but I just think at the moment I don't see that happening next year. I think there's too many other factors that are going to play into it, and I think it's better for a realistic goal for Mercedes to be like, let's get second. I think second's a real like attainable goal for them in not only
Mm,
the constructors but in the drivers' championship. And you also want to do that to give Russell momentum after losing Lewis, right? The whole team.
mm,
You don't want it to seem like we just lost our best body or best part,
mm,
right? You don't want it to seem like that, right?
mm,
You want it to seem like now we're stronger than ever. And if you bring in Kimmy, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to look like you're dragon ass. You have like a crippled toe.
mm,
You you have something like you're trying to replace one of the greatest driver of all time, right? And you can't. I think it's just not going to look good. I
mm.
think it's much better. Both of us agree. Just put him in the Williams. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say nah, yeah, because I was gonna say like maybe instead just leave him in F2 and then bring him like after that, but I guess the 1 year, just having the experience in F1, like it really is helpful. I was gonna say also
So
just in terms of what you're saying of if let's say next year they were trying to make their goal that they're gonna try to win the constructors again, bringing Kimmy into that. Everything we've talked about how much you don't want to put too much pressure on a rookie as soon as they come in, that would be insane. As soon as he hops in that seat, his main expectation is, hey, we're gonna win the constructors this year. That would be a lot for him to take in on top of
yeah.
trying to get used to the team and everything, and probably having to fight against Max, Lando, Russell, Sainz, Leclerc like day in day out, Hamilton.
Mhm.
That is a lot to ask of a rookie
It is.
driver.
Let's be
And as
real
much
here. I
and
mean,
as
we
much
just
as
talked
they
about
praise him, even though like what I just said, I think they think Russell is capable of that. I don't think they would. I don't think they're crazy enough to try to put an expectation like that on a rookie.
no, no, and we just talked about how experience matters, and I
Mm.
think we can both agree that if you swap Lewis for Kimi in the past few races, Mercedes doesn't do as good
Oh no,
as they
definitely
just
not.
did,
Yeah.
right? Um, I don't think Kimi handles the pressure as well, and I think that that's not a knock against him. That's any rookie, right? Put in that
Mm.
position, in those situations where let's be real here, Mercedes is still kind of on a climb up in a desperate kind of like we need to get back to the way it was, right?
Mm.
It's just a lot. It's a lot. It's almost a Ferrari level of pressure, and you don't want that.
Mm. Exactly.
Yeah. Moving on in terms of drivers, though, you want to
Mm.
quickly talk about the mess that is RB and Red Bull.
I don't even know if I'm fully caught up on all the details of that. From what I know, and just yeah, just interrupt me as soon as I say something wrong. But there's a clause in Perez's contract where basically I think it's like if he's below 100 points of max, I think like at the summer break or something like that, he could potentially get dropped. So then because of that, that's why there's talks right now about who could potentially take that seat. And I think Liam recently had a test in one of the Red Bulls and his times were pretty good.
Hmm.
So then now there's just all the conversations of, oh, should it be Liam, should it be Ricardo, and then Yuki is right there like, why am I not being considered? And I think my
Yeah,
thoughts on it. My thoughts is always just screw both of them. I think Yuki should take it if anyone, but it seems like I don't know why, but for whatever reason, they're just not showing Yuki love like that.
they're not. It's weird. It's very, very strange. And so it's such a complicated story. So on one hand, right, with Sonoda, you have the fact that he was brought in originally, and this is no knock to him. He was
Mm,
brought in because of these guys, right? They
Honda.
made a deal with Red Bull, and Honda was like, "Look, we'll work with you on engines, but we got this guy, and we got
Mm,
this guy, and we need you to put him in your academy. And if he doesn't do well, he doesn't do well, but we need you to support him."
mm, How
Oh, they
long
did
ago
it,
was this?
and
Also
so
for context,
2021, his
2021.
rookie
Oh
season.
yeah. Mm.
hmm And
Oh, because I
yeah,
was gonna say,
2021
I
was
thought
not
even
good.
before his rookie season, he was a part of Red Bull's driver program, like in some
He
capacity other
was.
times. Yeah.
He was, but I think he started that Red Bull Academy around 2019, which is
Mm.
when Red Bull switched to Honda engines. Or
Mm.
it might have been 2018 when
Mm.
Toro Rosso started using Honda engines.
Yeah. Okay.
Any way you slice it, you can trace his deal basically with the Honda and Red Bull deal.
Mm.
And that just means that in a certain light, I guess now they're like, you're a good driver, but the reason why we had you in the first place isn't really there anymore.
Mm.
And that's kind of why we've talked about like Austin Martin should be a choice for him, but it's not, and that's really sucky, right? And now he's stuck with this
God, Stroll.
dilemma and disaster that is Red Bull, because
Mm.
that Sonoda is the most stable, and this is hilarious to say. He is the most stable of the four drivers
No, absolutely.
because when you talk about Max, there are more and more rumblings, not just from his
Oh,
father,
I wasn't
but from
thinking of
people close to
Max,
him.
but oh, okay, yeah. Keep going.
No, that he's considering leaving, and that he doesn't want this track that has kept appearing. At least his
Mm.
father certainly has been vocal about this. They don't like that this whole thing has been happening. Where now with obviously we've talked endlessly about the Horner thing, but then that cascaded into Newey leaving, right?
Mm.
And them saying that Newey isn't important. Actually, these other guys that were under his wing are the more important guys, so we don't need Newey anymore. So then he leaves, right? And then the fact that since that's happened, Red Bull hasn't been on a dominant development trend the way that they usually are.
Mm.
And I can imagine that from Yossa's perspective, for his own son, looking at his the benefit of his son, that Mercedes looks like they're getting their shit together finally. There's no place for him at McLaren, so Mercedes is probably the best option after that. I think it's more realistic that Max could leave, right, than Perez keeping a seat, which is like that's incredibly just ridiculous to say, but I think that's true. I think it's true. I
Mm.
think there's a lot of volatility happening now.
Wait, so you
After
think it's more
Max, right?
likely Max leaves, Paris stays, and they pair someone with Paris?
I didn't say that. I didn't say
Okay,
that.
okay, okay.
I
No,
just
no,
mean
I was
that
just making
it's
sure.
more
That's
likely
not.
that Max leaves, or sorry, it's more likely that Max leaves than
Mm.
Perez stay in the current situation.
Mm.
You know what I mean? That his contract is fulfilled and they don't drop him at the end of the year,
Mm.
or before that even. And because you're right, because talking about Perez's seat specifically, right? They tested Liam Lawson actually not for the RB seat. They tested to see if he could make the RB work, like the actual Red Bull seat work. They
Yeah.
tested him in the Red Bull for a filming day. And I want to say that before I say like his deficit to like Max Verstappen's times, that filming days are a lot different than what like Daniel Ricciardo did last year. Daniel Ricciardo was able to get a lot more time, probably like 2 to 3 times longer of a practice before doing hot laps compared to Liam. Liam was doing what's called a film day, where they are very restricted in what they can do because the point of it is not developing the car. You're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to do it so that the sponsors can get footage so that they can make commercials. That's genuinely what it is. And so Liam had to do, a bunch of stuff like probably stop and goes, launches, cool moves and shit just to look good on camera, and probably not a lot of time to put down some blistering laps. Um, Even with all that, he was a little less than 2.5 tenths off of Max Verstappen's time. We can both safely say that that's better than Paris.
Yeah.
Um, is it as good as Ricardo might do? Who knows? Who knows? I think it's
I
still
would.
a safer bet
I feel
to
like it's
put
fair to
Ricardo
say
in the Red
yes to
Bull.
that.
Maybe. I think it's a safer bet to if I were Red Bull,
Mm.
and let's say that we are confident Max stays. I think
Mm.
it's the safest bet to put Ricardo in the Red Bull seat, right? And to put Liam in the RB. And that what you say is that Ricardo, we're giving you a 2-year contract.
1 year.
If you, oh, okay, let's meet in the middle. Let's
Come
say a
on, no.
1-to-1.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's say a one to
Let's
one.
not let's not give this guy
But I
too
think
much credit.
the reason why I said 2 years because when you're entering a new regulation, you don't necessarily want a driver change. You want
Yeah, that's
stability,
true.
and you
That's
want to be
true.
able to find some good data. And Ricardo also obviously is going to be just a huge
Mm.
marketing boom, right? So I would say that that's a better decision to put him in a 2-year contract. And then you give Lawson and Sonoda the same, like, 2-year contract. And you say, hey, in this 2-year span, we're going to be looking at both of you guys in the RBC. And whoever is better from one of you is going to take Ricardo's, unless Ricardo decides he's going to revert back to 2018 Ricardo or 2017 Ricardo.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a good decision. I think that motivates all parties. And I think that's probably the most stable scenario. And that doesn't, Ricardo's going to do better than Perez for the constructors. I confidently believe that, but that's not a high bar. So I don't think there's too much weight to saying that.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I think, especially from the conversations we had last episode, I'm still more of, like, I don't think Ricardo really deserves a chance like that. And obviously, and like I just said, between Liam and Yuki, I think Yuki like just clearly deserves it more than Liam, and would make more sense than Liam if we're talking about putting him in the Red Bull. He's had what, 4 years of experience in the sport now. Like, why would you not take him over Liam? Why would you take the risk on Liam when you can always just bring Liam into the RB? So I guess that's what I would prefer to see. I guess between that would still leave a seat open if, let's say, they did bring Yuki up and then they put Liam in the RB, then I guess that would just leave. Well, yeah, because I don't think it makes sense to drop Ricardo and then just put Perez in the RB, because, again, what is Perez like? Perez doesn't necessarily deserve like that kind of chance. I think in that situation, maybe it would be better to put Ricardo there and just completely Perez pretty much out of the sport at that point. I don't think anyone will necessarily be upset. But I guess I do, and that's where I see your point a lot, because when I think of it like that, it does seem like kind of a waste. Well, which it is, and it has been like a waste to keep Ricardo in that RB. I don't know. We'll just
There's another piece. There's another piece of the puzzle
What's the
too,
other piece?
because the thing that they didn't expect is that their development driver Isaac Hajar is now leading the F2 championship. Um, that's a problem,
Yeah,
because now
because you
you're
think if
looking
he
at the whole
wins,
reason why.
yeah.
If he wins, that's you're gonna have a kind of another Dragovich situation in your hands, Porsche situation in your hands.
To be
You're gonna have
honest,
to
then,
get
if
a
that's the
chance.
situation, then to me that clears everything up. I think Perez go, Ricardo go, Yuki up, Liam and Isaac in the RB. I think that's
I don't
fantastic.
disagree.
That's the way I would go with it.
I don't disagree, but I think that is reliant on Hajar continuing this stretch of good
Mm,
performance, because this is the first time in the season he's been leading it. It's not like he's been leading it the whole season.
mm.
Um, and you
Has he
also,
gotten
if
wins?
Ricardo, yeah, I think he's got a couple.
I
It's a couple
mean,
sprint wins.
you could argue even if he doesn't win, like he could still deserve to
No,
come into the sport.
but
I
I think
mean,
it's his first season
Ollie
in
just got a
F2.
contract, even though yes, it's with Haas, but if he's getting a contract with RB, I think that's valid.
Behrman, this was his second season in F2. He had a
Mm,
season last season.
mm,
So maybe that's what I mean. I think, like, it's not unrealistic to say, like, Hajar, stay one more season in F2, continue to build
mm.
those skills, and like, if he wins the championship this year, then maybe their hands are tied.
Yeah.
But I think if he gets second or something, you're right. I don't know. It's one of those things. That's a tough call.
Mm,
Red Bull has seen, like, what happens if you try to rush it,
mm.
and it doesn't really work out. So yeah, I think they'll do what I said, even though I don't disagree with what you said. That I
Mm.
would love to see Sonoda in the Red Bull, and I'd
Yeah.
love to see Lawson at RB, and for another junior to take the place next to Lawson. But I think they're going to do that. No,
Yep.
I don't think they're
That's
going to
very
do that.
fair.
Yeah.
I guess last little bit of news before we talk a little bit about Hungary, and I also just got remembered of this because of your shirt you're wearing. But Logan Sargent is officially not going to be in F1 anymore. He signed an IndyCar contract. I don't even know with which team. Um,
Prema.
what Prema?
Prema is going to create an IndyCar team next year, so
Oh,
they
I didn't
decided to
even know
recruit him.
that. That's crazy. I mean, hey, but good
Yeah.
for him. Good for him.
Hmm.
Even though I've been an advocate of, I don't think he was really cut for it. I don't think he was performing well enough for me. So I'm not necessarily too
You,
upset to see him go, but I'm happy to hear that he already has like a contract lined up. He knows where he's gonna go after he leaves. But I know there's
he
rumors
got
flown around that they might drop him mid season. I don't know how like concrete those
no,
rumors are. Yeah, I don't think that's actually gonna
no.
happen. But I heard some people saying that.
That was because, actually, it almost did happen. but not going to happen anymore. What
Mm.
happened was is that Ocon was actually in the final stages of talking with Vowles about doing that mid-season because Ocon was tired of Alpine,
Dude,
and it actually,
wow, he's
serious,
actually in
this was
prison
going to
in
happen.
Alpine right now.
No, 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 because what happened was is it got all the way up to the CEO of Alpine and Renault, and he
Mm.
said no.
Oh, wow.
Like it was going to happen in Silverstone. It was going to be a full-fledged thing, and
Wow.
so Sargent's only here because
Because the
the
CEO of
CEO
Alpine
of
was like, no.
Alpine was like, no. So, like, and hey, look, Sargent got 11th at Silverstone. I think it's possible that now that Sargent doesn't have this thing held over his head, that he knows, like, I'm going to IndyCar now. I'm just going to give this the best I got. That he put in possibly his best performance of the season so far. Because 11th is nothing to scoff at in this
No,
really competitive
absolutely.
grid.
Absolutely.
He did a great job. And his teammate, I think, did Albon get in the points? I think Albon got into points for Britain too,
He
which
might have
it was a good
been
weekend for Williams,
P9, I think.
something like that. So not even that far off of Albon. Um, yeah. Anyway, that whole thing about Prema joining IndyCar and everything, I think that's just and Sargent being recruited. It's great for him. I
Mm.
really hope it works out because he is a fantastic driver, just not one of the best 20 in the world, and that's nothing to be down about.
Mm.
Right.
Hey,
It's so
I'm not
competitive.
opposed to if he tries to come back again in the future. Like maybe he does just
Who
need
knows?
a little break from it, kind of refresh, take another
Andretti.
shot at it. If that ever happens,
Sorry. Yeah, that's
2028.
like it's like fucking seeing Beetlejuice in F1. Like somehow it's like a spooky thing to talk about. I It's gonna happen. I don't think it's had so much momentum,
No, it's gonna
and
happen. It's eventually
it's
gonna
gonna
happen. Well,
happen.
no, I thought we said like it's for sure gonna happen. Once Cadillac comes in.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah.
certainly the timetable. I think it's gonna be sooner than that. I think there's gonna be something like that will happen that finally they'll work out some sort of deal. And I think
Mm.
right now it's just a lot of drama, and it's just got to settle down, and then they got
Yeah.
to work
No,
it out.
I hope they like try to do another like really big push to come in 2026.
Right. But yeah, getting to is that it before we get to Hungary?
Yeah, that's all I had.
Yeah. All right. So Hungary this weekend. One of my favorite and most I think it's one of the most underrated tracks. I
Mm.
think it doesn't necessarily provide always the greatest racing,
Mm.
but I just love the track. I think the track is like we've talked about this, but it's like a go-kart track.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so much fun. It's got
No,
some great
a
elevation,
qualifying
great
lap around that
turns.
track is fun.
They call it Monaco without the walls, and
Mm.
that's honestly not a terrible description because it's a high downforce driver skill track for sure.
Yeah.
The drivers who do well here are the drivers that are really good, which is why Hamilton got pole last year, and Russell
Mm.
got pole the year before. Granted, that Mercedes was kind of good in the low speed, but we'll see this year. Who do you have as your pole position prediction?
So to be honest, this is just my at least for pole position, it's a lot of bias, not as much actual like
Lewis.
technically thought out. Yeah. I think Lewis will get
It's
pole
Lewis.
because of like you just
Oh,
said,
it's a good one.
he has the most pole positions at this track. I'm pretty sure has the most race wins at this track also. He has 8. If he potentially hypothetically was to win, then he would essentially like tie his own record for most wins at a single track, which would be
He would
nuts.
also ascend to greatness because if he won again, it's just going to be. I mean, what do I mean ascend to greatness? He's already great, but I mean like,
A man can dream, chemo. A man can dream.
yeah, I don't think he will win. We'll get to that in a second, but I think that's a pretty good one.
Mm,
I would have said Lewis, but I think Max is gonna take pole.
mm.
Yeah, I think that Red Bull is just so dialed,
No, I think
and
if I'm being a bit more realistic, I would say Max.
it's Max, yeah.
Mm,
And I don't think the McLarens have been particularly good, like in that strict one that pace. And we saw it in Austria, right? Which is
mm,
you could call it it's a different track, but you could call it a comparable lap where there's not a lot of room for error because the track time is so short, right? The lap
mm.
time is so short. And in those scenarios, Max's skill is incredible, and
Yeah.
he was able to get the what 3.5 tenths
And
on Miller
Silverstone
in
also, he
Austria.
had
It's
damage.
crazy.
That's also why he was not up there for quali pace.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
exactly.
I would have thought that he would out qualify Lando.
Hmm. Right, I agree. Um, in terms of the win, though. I think it's Lando. I think the McLaren is going to be mighty, and I think they're going to come back from these mistakes that they've been making, and I think they're gonna have some good pace. And it's going like if it's not going to be at Hungary, and this is McLaren fanboy in me, but I also think there's some logic behind it that at some point it's going to click.
Mm.
At some point they're going to have a flawless race.
Well,
It's
no, yeah,
bound to
I
happen.
I don't even think they necessarily have to have. Well, okay, I guess they do
Maybe
have
not
to have
flawless, but
a flawless race. Well, yeah, if no one else is making mistakes, as long as they don't make a mistake. But no, I do agree with you. Even with everything I said, like this episode about why they lost Silverstone and everything, that wasn't necessarily to say like I don't think they're incapable of winning a race. It's just why these certain races, the way they played out, they didn't do like just that last little bit they needed to do to win. But I do think they're capable of it. And at least also, so I also don't know too much about the actual data. Well, I'm trying to think who is faster at Monaco between Red Bull and McLaren, because I
Ferrari
don't
is the
know.
answer. But
Well, yeah,
McLaren
well,
McLaren is
other than
faster.
Ferrari.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah.
McLaren was
Then
faster.
then based off that, then I would think to say, McLaren might have a slight advantage when they're running like higher downforce, and so because of that, I would think that they'll end up having better race pace than Red Bull. So I do also have Lando down for the win.
It's interesting you should say that too, because the some of the data from FP1 and FP2, I watched a great video by a guy named Peter Windsor. I've
Mm,
talked about it before. Fantastic guy. He's kind of an old head, and he mentioned the speed trap values and the sector times for hard running, right, and like
mm,
long running, right, which is a much better metric on how the race is going to look.
mm.
And the McLaren was like it was almost 3/10 faster
Oh, wow.
every lap,
Mm,
and Lando was setting very consistent times, which means he wasn't like overly pushing those tires to a cliff.
mm.
And yeah, that's impressive. And I
This
think
was
it's
from
it's
practice.
yeah from
Yes.
both specifically from FP2. FP1 was
Mm,
was weird, but
mm,
Hungary is going to be a lot different than Silverstone in a lot of ways. Not only is it not as fast, but it's going to be scorching hot. Apparently, like it's ridiculous enough that a lot of the teams had to bring completely different cooling packages,
wow.
and have giant vents, yeah, on the car
Mm,
to make sure they didn't overheat. Those are
mm,
the conditions I think the McLaren are going to be really good in. If you think about
mm,
Miami, right? Miami
mm,
was not cold whatsoever. Anytime there was a situation where the tires would fall off a cliff, the McLaren seemed like they could delay that, or they
mm.
could plateau the cliff a little better than everybody
Yeah.
else. I think that'll suit them very,
Mm.
very well.
Especially with what we just said about Mercedes seeming to be performing better under cool conditions. It seems like if that's what the weather's going to be like for that weekend, then they might not be as in it for the fight. I kind of want to be delusional still and say that I think Hamilton was going to win. But even just from reading a little bit about what was going on in FP2, he doesn't seem like super happy with the state of the car right now. So I'm maybe not going to expect too much from Mercedes for the race.
Yeah, for the actual race pace,
Mm.
yeah,
I
and
still think he's
kind of
got it
goes
for
back
quality
to the
though. But
yeah, yeah.
mm,
Though I can see that, and I can see them working some magic and just making those tires get through the lap, right, and then
mm.
not having to work with the consequences of it being overly hot. That's possible. For your podium, who do you have?
So podium, it was Lando Max, and then I'm gonna say Piastri actually.
Exactly mine too.
Yeah.
Exactly mine. Yeah. Piastri's not that far behind. I think
Mm,
if it's just that Max's talent is just gonna make the difference. Um, who knows though? It could very well be a McLaren one too.
mm. Well, no,
If
it's
the
yeah,
McLaren,
especially with what we're
yeah,
saying right now about just kind of the package we
yeah,
think they'll have this weekend, the pace they'll have. Very, very
yeah,
well could be a 1-2.
100%. And I think I put McLaren as my best driver, and Lando's the best. Or sorry, Lando's the best driver. McLaren is the best team. I just think
Mm,
they're gonna. I think they're gonna execute a fantastic race that's as close to flawless as you can get at this competitive level of the sport.
mm.
Um, did you have? Do you have
I
someone else
mean,
in mind? You think?
I put Lewis down as best driver. That was mainly just because I was thinking like, oh, he get pole, and
Mm,
if he gets pole, like,
mm,
again, that was just me being very biased. But I think team wise, I think it's between. For me, it's kind of between McLaren and Red Bull. I think it's for literally every reason we just said. Probably McLaren will like edge out just enough, but especially if it's hypothetically a situation, where McLaren, clearly have the faster car, but Red Bull are able to, have a flawless strategy, and Max just puts in incredible laps to where, let's say, he manages to break the possible 1-2 that McLaren like arguably should get. Then I feel like in that
Hmm.
situation, I'd see Red Bull being the better team for that weekend.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally see that. And in terms of worst, I'm biased because I watched some of the highlights from practice, but it does not look like Austin Martin is going to have a good weekend at all.
Yeah,
And I
I
think Alonso will actually have a
uh,
terrible weekend. Yeah.
no, yeah, I mean Austin Martin are just. I feel like this is the earliest we've seen them take this big of a dip in terms of lacking with development. No, because how
I agree.
slowly
No, I agree,
last
but I
year.
think in a way, you've kind of summed up though their problem the past few seasons.
Oh
With that,
yeah,
like, oh,
yeah.
this is the soonest they've dipped, but you shouldn't be dipping every
No, no,
season.
well, no, yeah, that's what I mean. We know that
Yeah.
that's been their problem is that they don't develop properly through the year. But I feel like this is the earliest that
No.
we've seen such like just a dive bomb.
Ugh.
They've yeah,
No.
like they've not been scoring points. You're not hearing like
Last year,
anything, any sort of confidence from Alonso whatsoever.
no. Last year, it was like their car was just slow. It wasn't that the car was undrivable, but now
Mm,
it seems like their car is undrivable.
yeah.
It seemed like the on the radio, it seemed like neither of them wanted to be there. Like that car was so bad that they just were done. They didn't want anything to do with it.
Mm,
Yeah, it doesn't really it doesn't exactly inspire confidence in anyone
yeah.
to keep pushing, right? It doesn't.
Mm,
I think they're just in the dumps right now. Yeah.
yeah. So my worst team actually, I said Ferrari. Um, because I
Ooh,
think, because it seems like they haven't figured out like what exactly is going. I know FP2 they seem to put in some decent times. 'Cause I think
it was on par with Mercedes.
was it FP? I think
They're
Sainz topped FP1, didn't he?
something like that, but it's
Yeah, but that's also
FP1
that's
is
like
different.
FP1, so I really like I'm taking that very much with a grain of salt. Um,
Yeah.
but I think honestly their bare minimum for this weekend is do not let any of the Haas's finish ahead of either of your cars. And I no, like genuine. And I think
It's a
if that
crazy
happens,
goal.
whether in quali or the race, then for me like they're the worst team of the weekend. Because having
Fair
that
enough.
happen in Silverstone was like unacceptable. But if you let it happen for another race, like if Hulkenberg is getting a P6
Yeah.
and both your drivers are not in that top five, nah.
I mean, it's actually might be a pretty safe bet to say one of them is going to DNF,
Do you think so?
given the trend of the last like six races.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the last time both of them finished? I don't, and maybe Spain, I
Wait, who
think.
DNF'd Silverstone?
Oh, I guess I just counted Leclerc as a DNF at that point. My bad.
Well, no, but
Um,
to be fair, I think not scoring points might as well be DNFing. Like, well, yeah,
in a
but
lap time.
if we're
Yeah,
talking about
might as well.
for Ferrari, like have potentially DNFing should not even be considered
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
when you have Haas like getting P6s and getting double points.
So it's so impressive by them. Yeah, we
Mm,
talked about it earlier, but it's so great for Haas to get back into form.
yeah, and then worst driver. I'm not sure who to put for worst driver. I'm
I'll
just gonna
throw a
say
dart
Stroll.
at. Yeah,
Yeah,
there you go.
that you can never
That's a
go
safe
wrong
bet.
saying that. You can never go wrong saying that.
That's a safe bet for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think he'll bin it on what lap 10, 11?
No, I think he'll crash out during
You,
quali.
oh,
Like a really bad crash to where they can't fix the car by the next day and he doesn't race.
oh my god. Pit lane start.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
yeah,
actually no, to
something
be
like that.
honest, if I'm giving you like a realistic answer, well, that is a realistic answer, but I guess a more real answer, um bro, it's just because there's just drivers that consistently perform poorly, which is just Stroll, Perez, um, I guess Valtteri, and I mean I don't know. The Sauber car is just also like not good, so I don't even like really think about those drivers. But I guess it's someone who I think will underperform. I don't know, maybe Leclerc, because even though Silverstone wasn't fully his fault, um, it seemed like he was kind of underperforming. Because I'm pretty sure Sainz out qualified him for Silverstone, didn't he? Or am I
Yes, I
wrong?
believe he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I don't really know. I'm gonna say Leclerc then. Final answer.
I think it's a good choice.
Who's your worst driver?
But yeah, I said Alonso, just of the
Oh,
two
Alonso.
Aston
Oh
Martins.
yeah,
I
yeah.
would, and I just mean that he's just gonna have an abysmal performance. That
Mm.
not that he's bad, but just that like yeah, it's just not gonna be good. Maybe we'll have an iconic radio message from Alonso once again, back from like his
I
older player
hope
days
so.
or something. But nonetheless, I think this will be a good race for a lot of reasons, and I
Mm.
think it will be a showdown between the two McLarens and Max in the race. And the quality tomorrow morning is going to be nice.
I think
We're
it's
gonna have
gonna
so
be
much fun
a
watching
very
quality.
tight quali. Not gonna lie though, yo, quali at Silverstone, Russell's lap, 0.17 faster than everyone else. That was crazy. That was crazy.
Yeah,
That was an incredible quality lap. I felt so
yeah,
bad for him when he DNF'd.
yeah, yeah.
No, that
I,
was rough.
this is the second time now it's happened, right?
Hmm.
Something like that, where he's had to retire the like in Australia, right? He had to retire the car.
No, Australia. No,
You
Australia. He
remember?
crashed. Don't you remember that was a
Oh,
whole
oh, that's right. I was
Alonso
mixing
dirty
up.
air thing? Yeah,
I was mixing up 2023. Yeah.
yeah.
There was another. I feel like there was another. Oh, I guess you could say like Bahrain. They were having like engine cooling issues, but
No. I know. I'm trying to remember what you're thinking of because there was definitely another race where he just had to
where he bled out.
retire the car. No, are you sure it was this year?
Well, he definitely did it at Australia last year, but I thought
No, yeah, I
there
remember
was another one this
Australia
year.
last year.
No, I thought there was another one this year.
Hmm.
Anyway,
I don't know.
whatever the
It
case
was
is,
really
yeah.
unlucky, yeah, and just
Despite
so
all of that,
random, so random
yeah. Despite all that, he's still ahead of Lewis in the standings
by 1 point. Well, yeah, no, he
by one
has kind
point.
of
But
been
if he
out
has
qualifying Lewis like 10-2.
something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Not saying Lewis is worse, just that
No,
statistically he
Russell's
hasn't
having
put
a
in a great
phenomenal
year.
season. Russell's having a great
Yeah,
season.
yeah. But yeah, I'm excited, man.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to you after the Hungarian Grand Prix, after Lewis's amazing pole position. Peace out.